Welcome back to Inside City Hall. The national conversation on terrorism and security is increasingly focused on the issue of Syrian refugees and whether or not they should be allowed into the United States. That debate is taking place in state houses around the country as well as in the halls of Congress. Here now to talk more about that is Congressman Jeffries, who joins us from Capitol Hill. Good evening. Good to see you.
Good evening. Good to see you, Errol.
Yes. Well, now, what is happening at the level of Congress? We know that about 30-odd governors have said that they don't want Syrian refugees to come in unless there are further assurances or some other kind of conversation that takes place. What's being talked about in Congress?
Well, House Republicans have indicated that they're preparing to introduce legislation that could conceivably block or significantly limit the ability of President Obama to move forward with his plan to locate approximately 10,000 Syrian refugees here in the United States of America. There are significant concerns that the American people rightfully have as it relates to their safety and security, and we've got to take those concerns seriously. However, it is important to note that there are already 2,000 Syrian refugees who have been successfully relocated here in the United States of America without incident, that the process that has been put in place to make sure that the Syrian refugees who come into this country will not threaten the safety and security of the American people is extensive. The process is generally an 18 to 24-month time period that it takes for the United States government to determine that someone is appropriate to come into our country. It involves at least a 13-step process where at any moment individuals can be excluded based on something that does not look right.
So I mean, are your Republican colleagues in particular, are they aware of this? The way it's described, it often sounds as if you know, a bunch of young men with or without rifles were going to be put on planes and then just dropped off somewhere in the middle of the United States. That doesn't sound like the process you just outlined.
Well, the big problem is that the debate so far, at least here in Congress, Errol, is operating in a fact-free zone, because the reality of the situation is very different than what's being communicated to the American people. In fact, approximately 75% of the Syrian refugees who have already been relocated here and those who will come in the months and years ahead are children, infants, or elderly individuals 60 years or older. And in fact, only 2% of the individuals who fall into the category of a Syrian refugee that could make it into the United States of America would be classified as someone who is a male between the age of 18 and 35. And of course, they are extensively vetted before being given opportunity to locate here.
So if that's the case, is this turning into sort of a litmus test for support of the president's overall policy toward battling the Islamic State?
Well, again, it's reasonable for us to all have concerns as it relates to the best way to contain the Islamic State as it relates to their aspirations to strike us here in America, to strike our allies in Western Europe, and to strike people all across the world. But the president's policy as it relates to Syrian refugees, at the end of the day, is consistent with what we've attempted to do here in the United States of America, which is to embrace people who are confronted with extreme terror, very difficult circumstances. Many of these children have been raped, violently attacked, and subjected to just inhumane conditions. And as part of the overall global response, it seems reasonable that the United States of America can do its part.
There are a number of Democrats, including some prominent Democrats like Hillary Clinton, who have called for the number of Syrians to be admitted to be as high as 65,000. What's your sense? Do you have a number in the back of your head?
Well, I think 10,000 seems like a reasonable number at this moment, and it's appropriate to proceed with caution in terms of us making sure that we can completely convince the American people that the process is in place to protect their safety and security. So I think holding the number at 10,000 for the moment is the right thing to do.
Okay. You have a new Speaker of the House since the last time you and I spoke. Do you know Paul Ryan personally? Have you guys served together? And what's your sense of how he's going to perform as Speaker?
Well, I got the opportunity to get to know Chairman Ryan to some degree during my first 2 years in Congress when I served on the Budget Committee and he was the chairman before he moved over to Ways and Means, and now, of course, he's the Speaker of the House. He's a very intelligent, hardworking, personable individual, straight shooter. I disagree with many of the policies that he's put forward as chairman of the Budget Committee in his prior capacity. We're talking about Paul Ryan budgets that dramatically cut funding for higher education, for Medicaid, for assistance to those who need food, in terms of the hungry people across America, almost 50 million folks. So his policies have been very right-wing and very retrograde in terms of the impact that they would have on the American people. Hopefully, as Speaker, he'll pursue a different path.
What's that driven by, as far as you can tell? I mean, Paul Ryan is often described as somebody who has a lot of ideas about how government in general and the tax system in particular should be run. Is he trying to save money to pay down the debt or the deficit? What's the point of cutting off all of these programs, do you think?
Well, here's the big problem. He claims that it's all about fiscal responsibility. But if you actually look at the plans that he's put forth, what he's attempted to do is to cut the top tax rate for the wealthy and for the well-off, which is currently at 39.6%, and drop it all the way down to 25%. And in order to pay for that dramatic tax cut, Errol, he would slash and burn all of these other social programs which are so important to the social fabric of America. And that's problematic. Hopefully, he'll realize the folly of his ways and won't pursue that as Speaker of the House.
Well, I often wonder about that, since there are a lot of people hurting, not just in your district, but really all around the country. In every state, there are at least some people who are in dire need of those programs. Let me ask you about something closer to home. You stood beside the president of the Correction Officers Benevolent Association at a recent press conference, and Norman Seabrook at the time, I think on the same day, if not at that very press conference, has been calling on the Correction Commissioner to step down. Is that how you feel as well? And what is the criticism of the Correction Department that brought you to that press conference?
Well, I'm not prepared to call for the Corrections Commissioner to step down. I do support the call by Norman Seabrook, who vigorously represents his members who work in the most dangerous precinct in the city of New York in terms of the situation they confront every day in Rikers Island. It's clear that if we're going to reform Rikers Island, and reasonable people should be able to agree that change is necessary, that the corrections officers should be at the table as part of the discussion as to the best way to create the safest possible environment, both for the officers who work there each and every day and the individuals who are detained there throughout the year.
Is there something in particular that the city is not doing? They've certainly rolled out any number of reforms and promised reforms.
Well, the big question is, as part of the city moving in that direction, which I support the notion of top to bottom criminal justice reform, and we've made some progress on that here in the House today in terms of sentencing reform, particularly in the drug context and trying to reduce mass incarceration. But at the same time, I represent a lot of correction officers who live in the communities that I'm proud to serve. They work in a very dangerous environment in Rikers Island. They have to deal with the Crips, the Bloods, the Natas, and a wide variety of violent gangs. We've got to make sure that we also keep them safe as they sacrifice and put their lives on the line each and every day.
Okay, we're going to leave it there for now, and we'll be watching to see what comes out of the discussion about